Welcome back to another episode of the Football Game Tonight podcast. I'm your host, Sean Kuzma, and this is the place where we talk about the latest pro football news in action. So if you're a fan of the NFL, you've come to the right place. In this latest episode, we have Jalen Ramsey on the ticker. We're also going to talk about Jonnu Smith. We'll do the Minka Fitzpatrick story. We'll talk about Darren Waller, and then we'll cap this show off with the Lions running back story. So let's start with Jalen Ramsey. So a lot of this episode is going to be about what happened with the Steelers and the Dolphins. The headliner between the Steelers and Dolphins, that trade is definitely Jalen Ramsey. Jalen Ramsey was traded from the Dolphins to the Steelers. Now, let's take a look at Jalen Ramsey's career. He started off with the Jaguars. He goes to the Rams. After that, he lands with the Dolphins. And now he's with the Steelers. Now, I like Jalen Ramsey being on the Steelers more than I do him being on the Dolphins, because I think the Steelers are a well-ran football team, and I think the Steelers are closer to competing for a Super Bowl than the Dolphins were. You know, the Dolphins at times show a little bit of promise, but it never really materializes. They're not a team that really can flip that switch in the playoffs and go on a deep playoff run. It's just not there for them yet. Whereas the Steelers have made a lot of good moves this offseason. So capping that off by getting Jalen Ramsey too, I think that gets them much closer to being in the hunt. So I like Jalen Ramsey being on the Steelers more than I liked him being on the Dolphins. I think back to when Jalen Ramsey was on the Rams, helped them get over the hump and win a Super Bowl. So it's a good fit for Jalen Ramsey, and I'm looking at the cornerbacks that the Steelers have. You have Jalen Ramsey on one side of the field, and you have Darius Slay on the other side of the field. So you have two really good cover guys that are going to be able to take away opposing wide receivers. So you can see Mike Tomlin's vision on this one. He's thinking, like, I'm going to make it really tough to throw the football against our defensive backfield. And I think Mike Tomlin was very comfortable with what the Steelers have from a pass rushing perspective with TJ Watt, with Highsmith, the rest of the guys they have there. I just feel like they felt good. Cam Hayward, they felt like they were good up front. So they went and solidified the back end of their defense with Jalen Ramsey, with Darius Slay, two really good cornerbacks. One of the better cornerback tandems in the entire National Football League. It's not going to be easy to throw against those two guys. And Jalen Ramsey in particular, not only a really good cornerback, very physical cornerback, very good tackler, which, you know, the Steelers love. A corner guy that can run and cover everybody is great. But when you have Jalen Ramsey, he can run and cover people, but he can also come up and run support and lay a hit on you. So what does that do? That energizes a football team, because big hits swing the momentum in your favor, and then your teammates rally around that momentum. That's one of the beautiful things about football. A big hit can energize your football team. Jalen Ramsey certainly brings that to the table, a very physical football player. And then you look at his characteristics, the intensity this guy brings. He's a very intense guy that is going to help this football team with that intensity, just because you're energizing people with the big hits, the big plays, and also your intensity too, because he's just locked in and focused, and he plays with a burning fire inside of his soul that is contagious for the other players on the team, the Steelers, because when they see someone else taking it that serious, that wants to win that bad, it definitely rubs off on the other players. They feel like they gotta up their game a notch too, because Jalen Ramsey is leaving it all out on the field. Those are the type of guys you want when you're building your team, when you're establishing a new nucleus for your football team that is gonna, connect with the other players on the team, because it starts with your core guys at the top. But that identity with those core guys at the top trickles down all the way to the bottom of your roster. The 53rd man. So to me, you need guys like Jalen Ramsey that are going to come in and be, your headliner when it comes to talent, and with TJ Watt and Cam Hayward. Jalen Ramsey fits in perfectly. You also have Darius Slay, like I said. So the Steelers have gotten much better on the defensive side of the ball. I think they're feeling really good heading into the season with the moves they made, with Jalen Ramsey and Darius Slay. I think they feel like they're going to be able to compete with just about anybody. And you look around, particularly the AFC North division with Lamar Jackson and what they have now on offense and how fast they play. You look at Joe Burrow and how potent that offense was last year with the Bengals, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. The Steelers feel like maybe they can counter some of these great offenses in the AFC North with a Jalen Ramsey and Darius Slay tandem that are going to be able to line up right across from the guy on the other side of the ball and stay right on their hip, get in there, break some passes up, jump some routes, get some interceptions, force some turnovers for the Steelers defense. That's what they have in the back of their mind right now heading into this upcoming football season with a defense that is loaded with stars now. Let's face it, they're loaded with stars. You talk about TJ Watt, one of the best pass rushers in the National Football League, if not the very best. Cam Hayward, we all know what he brings to the table. A leader of this football team, so physical, strong as an ox. Can't say enough good things about Cameron Hayward. I like Highsmith as a pass rusher and how he was able to come along. Now you add Jalen Ramsey and Darius Slay at the cornerback positions. You got to be able to take away those wide receivers just because if the NFL is a passing league now, which it is because the quarterbacks are so good and these offenses have such good rhythm and timing, you need players in the secondary that can disrupt that. It looks like Jalen Ramsey and Darius Slay are going to be good enough to get the job done. If I was a betting man, I wouldn't bet against Jalen Ramsey and Darius Slay just because those guys are lockdown corners. Moving on, though, we have next the Jonnu Smith story. So not only did the Steelers get Jalen Ramsey, they also got Jonnu Smith. And Jonnu Smith, I remember when he was on the Titans and there was flashes of brilliance from Jonnu Smith where it was like this guy is really good. He's contributing to this offense for the Titans. He's making plays, particularly down in the red zone. He would get open and he would catch touchdowns to the Titans offense. So it's like this guy has something. There's something there for this team. And last year, a lot of people don't realize this, but with the Dolphins, Jonnu Smith had the best season of his career. He was really good last year to the Dolphins to the point where you're like, why did the Dolphins ship this guy off? The ship out Jalen Ramsey and Jonnu Smith, that's a bold decision for the Dolphins, but a risky decision that might not be the best decision for the Dolphins ends up being a nice little victory for the Steelers because they have a decent haul here with Jalen Ramsey and Jonnu Smith. And Jonnu Smith, along with Pat Freiermuth in this offense, now you got two really good tight ends in this offense that are going to make life easier on Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers is going to have two tight ends over the middle that are going to be able to catch the football and turn upfield. That's very nice for the Steelers offense, particularly after losing George Pickens. Losing George Pickens, they did get DK Metcalf, but because of George Pickens' attitude, they thought he had a bad attitude. They wanted to send him packing, which I can't push back on that. George Pickens was a good football player, but he did have a questionable attitude often. So to send him packing, but to be able to bring in Jonnu Smith to pair up alongside Pat Freiermuth, you have DK Metcalf there still. There's going to be weapons here for Aaron Rodgers. So there's going to be plays to be made in this offense. And for a team that's trying to figure out, okay, can we survive without George Pickens? And I know DK Metcalf will fill George Pickens' shoes, but you're still looking for ways to find offense. So to be able to land Jalen Ramsey and Jonnu Smith, really good trade for the Steelers. I'm going to give that an A trade. That's an A grade because you brought in a big-time playmaker on your defense, and you brought in an underrated tight end. Jonnu Smith was one of the better tight ends in the league last year. So, and him coming off his best season ever, the fact that you were able to steal him away from the Dolphins, I don't know what the Dolphins were thinking on that one. The Steelers have to be feeling good about that because they basically picked the Dolphins' pocket, and the Dolphins should have been smart enough to see through this trade that, yeah, getting Minkah Fitzpatrick back is good, but they just gave up too much value. So for the Steelers, it's like kind of a dream come true for this football team. You got a big-time playmaker on offense and defense. So, like I said, DK Metcalf, Pat Freiermuth, Jonnu Smith, there's plays to be made there. I think DK Metcalf is going to come in, and obviously relationship-wise, he and Aaron Rodgers are very close. You're seeing them pop up in a lot of pictures on Instagram. You've already seen Aaron Rodgers publicly praise DK Metcalf, calling him a specimen, and praising his focus when it comes to honing his craft, things like that. Pat Freiermuth, very good in the red zone. Jonnu Smith, very good in the red zone. So when this team gets into that 20-yard line and in, they are going to be able to convert those red zone trips. It's going to be hard to stop this offense in the red zone because you have Aaron Rodgers' precision, and he can fit the football in these very tight windows, and you have two big targets in your tight ends in Jonnu Smith and Pat Freiermuth who know how to get separation when it's very tight down there in that red zone. Or maybe like a first, second, third, and goal type situation, where you're in an and goal situation, whether it's second and goal, third and goal, that's when you really need to be able to convert because you don't want to settle for field goals in those situations. So by having Jonnu Smith and Pat Freiermuth, those guys are going to be able to get open. They're going to convert those red zone trips into touchdowns. It's going to help Aaron Rodgers play more confidently because he's going to feel like he's playing really good football by getting it to his playmakers down in the red zone, turning those red zone trips into touchdowns. You're not going to see the field goal team come out as much. So, when you can turn it into 7 points instead of settling for 3 points, that's how you go from tight ball games to wins because you get 4 more points, and that significantly increases your chances of winning. When you're settling for field goals, now you're in tight football games, and now you're in a dogfight. You're trying to fight your way out of a dogfight. That's how games slip away from you. When you can punch it in, get 6 points plus the extra point, get 7 points. Now, those tight games turn into games that you're winning more often just because you're converting those red zone trips. So crucial, especially in the National Football League when the competition is so close. Everybody's so good. And like they say, any given Sunday in the National Football League. So to be able to put 6 points on the board and get the extra point, turn it into 7 points, you can't put an emphasis on how important that is when you get to the big leagues. Got to come away with 7 points. That's how you win games in the National Football League between DK Metcalf, Jonnu Smith and Pat Freiermuth, they're going to get the job done for Aaron Rodgers and for this Pittsburgh Steelers offense. Let's move on. We got the Minkah Fitzpatrick story, and his story is pretty interesting if we're being honest. So Minkah Fitzpatrick starts his career off with the Dolphins. And maybe he wasn't a great fit for Brian Flores' scheme because, Brian Flores is a trigger-happy, defensive-minded coach. He was the head coach of the Dolphins at the time, but he was calling the defense, so he's kind of like a defensive coordinator. And the thing with Brian Flores is he's a trigger-happy, defensive-minded coach. And what that means is he blitzes all the time. So you're running a lot of cover zero, you're running a lot of cover one. So for Minkah Fitzpatrick, what that means is he was in more man-to-man coverage situations. And for whatever reason, he wasn't a great fit in that Brian Flores' scheme. So the Dolphins end up trading Minkah Fitzpatrick to the Steelers. And if you followed Minkah Fitzpatrick's career, he was much better with the Steelers and Mike Tomlin's defense because Mike Tomlin had Minkah Fitzpatrick playing over top, maybe splitting the field in cover 2, where you split the field in halves, maybe cover 3, where, your deep middle third, or you're doing your sky or cloud call, where you maybe drop into the flats, or you're playing deep outside third. Maybe cover 1 where Minkah Fitzpatrick was the free safety over top. So he's playing kind of like a deep middle third, overseeing everything, but going where the football is being thrown to because he was the free safety. Whatever the reason, he seemed to perform better in that Mike Tomlin defense than that Brian Flores defense. And I think because he was able to play more over the top in Mike Tomlin's defense, and I think it was because he was playing more man in Brian Flores' defense. So Minkah Fitzpatrick was so much better with the Steelers than he was early on with the Dolphins. And part of that might have been because Minkah Fitzpatrick was early on in his career, rookie and second season, so he was still learning the ropes when it comes to the NFL, trying to get his confidence right and get up to speed with what it takes to be successful in the National Football League. But, when he gets traded to the Steelers, he starts performing much better, and Minkah Fitzpatrick fulfilled his potential with the Steelers. So fast forward to now, the Dolphins trade for Minkah Fitzpatrick back. So he starts his career with the Dolphins. They trade him away to the Steelers, and now the Dolphins trade for Minkah Fitzpatrick to come back. So you're kind of thinking, were the Dolphins higher-ups regretting trading away Minkah Fitzpatrick? Did they trade him away and be like, okay, that's one that got away from us? That's a decision that we shouldn't have made because Minkah Fitzpatrick is a really good player. We probably should have held on to him and kept him in our system. You have to wonder if that's the case because they drafted him, they traded him away, and now they traded for him back. So I don't know what really is going on with the Dolphins, but that's kind of what I'm reading between the lines on, that maybe they just regretted trading him away to the Steelers. They felt like it was a bad move that they maybe shouldn't have done, and now they feel like, hey, we need to bring this guy back because he can be a key piece for us on the back end of our defense. I guess that's what I'm reading between the lines and thinking, because why else would you draft a guy, trade him away, and then trade back for him? And look at the talent they gave up to get him back. They gave up Jalen Ramsey and Jonnu Smith. So, Minkah Fitzpatrick has to come into this Dolphins organization, somewhere he's been before, and really live up to the hype for this Dolphins defense, because they gave up a lot to get this guy. It's not like they got him for a bargain. They overpaid to get this guy back. So now Minkah Fitzpatrick has to hold up his end of the bargain and force some turnovers for this Dolphins defense because, like I said, it wasn't a cheap deal for the Dolphins. They paid a pretty penny to get this guy. And what I mean by that is they overpaid for him. This was not a cheap deal by any means for the Dolphins. But they got Minkah Fitzpatrick, a guy that can sit over top and read the quarterback's eyes and break on the football, create some turnovers. He's usually in position. He's a smart football player. He knows how to read the play, read the quarterback's eyes, and he can diagnose what's happening very quickly. So from that aspect of things, they went and got a playmaker over top who is going to really make them better against defending the pass. There's no doubt about that. You had to give up Jalen Ramsey to get Minkah Fitzpatrick. So you're kind of weighing on the scale. Is it a wash? Did they lose a little bit? It's hard to say, but it was a move that obviously the Dolphins felt like was the right move for them at this time. So they pull the trigger on that deal. They get Minkah Fitzpatrick. We'll see what he does. We'll see if this time around is better than his first time around. I think the Dolphins certainly feel that's going to be the case, so they want to pull the trigger on this trade. And another storyline we have to watch is, what's it like him going back there? Is there any resentment for being traded the first time around? Does he feel like they cast him off? He might have had some really good years with the Steelers, but if a team trades you away, you're almost like, were they even sold on me to begin with? Yeah, they drafted me, but they shipped me out pretty quick. So if you guys weren't sold on me, you drafted me, but you weren't really sold on me and you traded me away, does Minkah Fitzpatrick hold any resentment towards the Dolphins organization? Is he unhappy with the fact that they sent him up to Pittsburgh? Maybe he wanted, I don't know. I don't know if I can really say that. I feel like Minkah Fitzpatrick enjoyed his time with the Steelers just because he was performing so well, but it's like living in Miami has some appeal too. So there's a lot going on there, and there's a lot you have to break down. So we'll see if Minkah Fitzpatrick and the Dolphins can repair their relationship, if there's any bad blood between Minkah towards the Dolphins. It's just something to keep an eye on because a lot has unfolded there between the two sides. Now they're going to try to reconcile everything and get back on the same page. Is it going to work? Is there going to be a little bit of hostility? When things get rough, will this relationship break down? That's what I'm keeping an eye on with Minkah Fitzpatrick and the Dolphins because, you start off maybe 0-3, 0-2, or maybe 1-3, something like that. And it's like, does Minkah Fitzpatrick miss being on the Steelers? Like, hey, you guys drafted me, but you shipped me out when I went to the Steelers, and I feel like that might have been a better situation for me. Now I'm back here. We're not winning again. And, oh, yeah, by the way, if the Steelers are winning games and the Dolphins are not, Minkah Fitzpatrick might be like, hey, this isn't a good fit for me. Now I want to be the one that gets rid of you. So we'll see what happens. It's something to keep an eye on. Just see if Minkah Fitzpatrick and the Dolphins are able to coexist because there's a lot of history there. And sometimes when you have history that maybe didn't go how you initially planned and you try to patch things up, sometimes there's cracks there before you even patch things up. You know what I'm saying? There's cracks in the relationship already because of the first go around. So if things don't go the right way for the Dolphins and Minkah Fitzpatrick, we might see those cracks start to turn into tears and maybe things fall apart. But what if it's not like that? What if they hit the ground running? What if they're able to coexist? What if everything's water under the bridge? That's why we need to keep an eye on this situation and just see where the story goes from here and then call it like we see it. Because we could be completely wrong on that. It could be smooth sailing for Minkah Fitzpatrick. He could be happy to be back. It could be the perfect fit for Minkah Fitzpatrick and the Dolphins. You never truly know. What you really do is you watch the story unfold, then you call it like you see it. That's all you can really do when you're providing commentary on a situation like Minkah Fitzpatrick and the Dolphins. So just something to keep an eye on, see where it goes from here. And then later on, in a later podcast episode, we'll get to continue this story and then pick up where we left off, see what's happened, see how it's played out, and see really where it goes from here. I'm excited to see the Minkah Fitzpatrick Dolphins situation just because a lot of history there. See if they can overcome what happened the first time they were together. See if it goes right or see if it goes bad. That's what I'm keeping an eye on down in Miami. Okay, moving on. We have the Darren Waller story. So the Dolphins didn't stop at Minkah Fitzpatrick. They sent Jalen Ramsey and Jonnu Smith packing for Minkah Fitzpatrick. But then they had a hole at tight end. So what do? They trade for Darren Waller. And Darren Waller had retired playing for the Giants. You remember, Darren Waller was a Raven, and then he got sent out to the Raiders, or he joined the Raiders when he was there with John Gruden. Had some of his best days of his NFL career with the Raiders. Was one of the best tight ends in the league with the Raiders, and was a really dynamic football player who made a lot of plays for that Raiders offense. And he was a big-time player. There's just no other way to put it. He was really, really good with the Raiders. And after that, he ends up landing with the Giants. And I saw a video on Darren Waller talking about his situation with the Giants. He said they were basically using him as a fullback. So they were using him as a lead blocker going through the hole. He was in these massive collisions, basically playing fullback and lead blocker, and he was sitting on the sidelines and he was talking about how he knew then that he was done playing. He knew then that he was ready to retire because they were using him as a lead blocker and basically a fullback instead of a tight end, where he did his best work as a pass catcher. So it's pretty obvious that the Giants weren't the right team and the Giants weren't the right fit for Darren Waller. So he walks away from the game. He decides, I'm not going to play anymore. Then what's he do? He starts making music. He became a musician, starts making music. And that's what he did in his time away from football. Well, somehow the Dolphins must have connected with Darren Waller and got him to sign off on making a comeback if they traded for him. Because the Dolphins were able to trade for Darren Waller. Remember, he was on the Giants and he was retired. The Dolphins traded for him. The Giants weren't getting anything out of him. He had retired and walked away from football. So the Giants were happy to send him packing to the Dolphins because at least they got something in return for Darren Waller. They were getting nothing out of him. He was providing the Giants no value because he had retired and was doing music. The Dolphins, like I said, must have reached out to Darren Waller, asked him if he was, willing to come back, assess the situation, and decided, hey, we're going to trade for this guy because he's going to come out of retirement if we can go and get him. That's what ends up happening. The Dolphins traded for Darren Waller. They bring him in, and you're looking at the difference in situations between the Giants and the Dolphins. With the Giants, they were using him wrong. They were using him as a fullback or a lead blocker. He was doing a bunch of run blocking, leading through the hole. It was just too much wear and tear on Darren Waller's body. But with the Dolphins, it's the complete opposite. We're talking about a passing offense with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. You add Darren Waller to the mix, a really good tight end suddenly it's like, okay, there's weapons all over the field offensively for this Dolphins offense. They're going to be really good on offense. And I think Darren Waller picks up where he left off before he was a run blocker, and he gets back to being a pass catcher, which is peak Darren Waller. Now, we have to wonder whether or not age will become an issue because he is getting older. It is much later on in Darren Waller's career, but in terms of being an offensive weapon as a pass catcher, he was always very good, right at the top of the league when it comes to tight ends. So I think ability-wise, I think he'll be fine. Now, age-wise, how much did those hits take a toll on his body? How much did being a lead blocker or a fullback hurt Darren Waller? How much, does being away from the game slow him down? Because remember, reps make you a better player. Being away from the game, what happens is the game starts to surpass you. And it happens quick because everybody else is getting reps and getting better. So if you're sitting there stagnant, you start to fall behind. Like I said, ability-wise, I have no concerns at all. But age, being away from the game, those are the questions we have to ask when it comes to Darren Waller. I still think when you look at the big picture for the Dolphins, I think it's a very good move because of this passing offense that they have. They're tilted more pass than they are run. They like to throw it with Tua Tagovailoa to Tyreek Hill, to Jalen Waddle, and now you have Darren Waller work in the middle of the field, and with Tyreek Hill stretching things vertically, with Jalen Waddle stretching things vertically, there's going to be a lot of windows open underneath for Darren Waller to get open in because you have to commit one way or the other. And with these vertical threats that the Dolphins have, you have to commit to being deeper than the deepest, which means you have to stay over top of Tyreek Hill and you have to stay over top of Jalen Waddle. So when you're getting that deep, what happens is windows start to open underneath, and Darren Waller is fluid enough to, get open and, provide an option for Tagovailoa. So I like this piece of the puzzle for the Dolphins. You also have to factor in that they lost Jonnu Smith, who was really good last year, and they had to fill that role with somebody. To be able to fill it with Darren Waller, it's a pretty good fit. And if Darren Waller hits the ground running and he becomes a big splash for this Dolphins offense, they're going to be terrifying. I'm just going to be honest with you. They're going to be terrifying on offense. Just because we all know what Tyreek Hill brings to the table. I mean, this guy you can't cover him. He's too fast. He turns everything into a track meet. He's going to beat you deep. No matter what coverage you do, if you roll coverage there, if you put a safety over top, if you have a corner on him and a safety over top, he still finds a way to get over top because his speed is just so blazing fast. It's on a different level. And in a league where you have a bunch of fast people. Everybody's fast in the National Football League. Tyreek Hill is still much faster than everybody else. There's a pretty big gap between Tyreek Hill and everybody else. So, and let's be honest, on the opposite side of the field, Jalen Waddle is no slouch either. In terms of speed, blistering fast. You have two guys that turn every single game into a track meet. Then you look at what Darren Waller does good. For a tight end, he plays the game incredibly fast too. So you have a bunch of fast, athletic people all over the field getting separation and turning it into big plays for this offense. As long as Tagovailoa stays healthy, this is going to be a potent offense, and there's going to be a lot of firepower. It's going to be fun to watch. I'm a Lions fan, but I'm a fan of the NFL. I'm a fan of a team that puts a good product on the field. I think it's going to be fun to watch this Dolphins offense just because, like I said, they turn every game into a track meet. There's athletes all over the field. Collectively, their team speed, they're just running like the wind. Everybody can get separation. Tagovailoa, he can put it on these guys a little bit. You know, one thing Tagovailoa does do well is he's got some accuracy where he can put the football where it needs to be, so these guys will be able to get their opportunities. So from the Dolphins offense point of view, I like what they've done. You know, obviously Jonnu Smith coming off his best season, they had to do a package to get Minka Fitzpatrick. They wanted to get Jalen Ramsey out of there to be able to plug in Darren Waller. It seems like from the get-go, it seems like it's going to be a pretty good fit. Darren Waller will have to turn back the clock a little bit. He's going to have to reinvent himself a little bit and get back to who he was with the Raiders, because the Raiders version of Darren Waller was the best version of Darren Waller. If he can get back to what he was with the Raiders, the Dolphins just hit a home run, maybe even more than a home run, maybe a grand slam, just because I think it's going to be really tough to defend this offense. I think they're going to be able to put points up in bunches, and they're going to just be able to outscore teams. You know what I mean? They're going to be able to outscore teams. So what that does is it puts the other team in a position where you have to keep up. You have to keep up and you have to generate a lot of offense just to be able to stay in the game. And let's be honest, there's not a lot of teams in the NFL that can just pile it on when it comes to scoring a bunch of touchdowns. You know, I think about teams like the Lions offense, highest scoring offense in the NFL. Yeah, they can pour it on and score a bunch of points. The Ravens can pour it on and score a bunch of points. But when you get into these shootouts where you got to score a lot of points, there's a lot of teams that just simply don't have the offensive firepower to win those games that are shootouts. The Dolphins have something there where they can turn games into shootouts where they're scoring just a bunch of points and the other team has to be able to keep up, which I think plays in the Dolphins' favor, because there's some teams, you know, the bottom half of the NFL can't generate that kind of offense. It's just the reality of the situation. So now the top teams in the NFL have to be able to match the Dolphins' firepower. I don't know how that doesn't play to the Dolphins' advantage. I think it does play to the Dolphins' advantage. You know, I think it tilts the odds in their favor a little bit. And that's what you're trying to do in the offseason when you're trying to gain a competitive edge or a competitive advantage somehow. I think the Dolphins were able to do that by stacking their skill players on the offensive side of the ball. Okay, moving on. We have the Lions running back stories. And we all know how good Jahmyr Gibbs is. The guy is an electric running back, so fast, very high octane, explosive. Those are the things that come to mind when I talk about Jahmyr Gibbs. A draft pick that the Lions definitely hit on, and a guy that for a long time people were chanting he needs more touches, and you can definitely see why people feel that way, because Jahmyr Gibbs is dangerous. Every time he touches the football, he has a chance to take it all the way to the house, just because he's so fast. And if there's any crease there or there's any daylight, he's going to find it. It's off to the races. That's how fast Jahmyr Gibbs is. You know, the driving force of Jahmyr Gibbs' game is his speed and his explosiveness. He gets up to top end speed so quickly. The acceleration, those are the things that jump out at you when you're watching this guy play. But don't overlook what David Montgomery brings to the table either. This is a true thunder and lightning dynamic that the Lions have going on there, where David Montgomery is clearly the thunder and Jahmyr Gibbs is clearly the lightning. Now, I know they're Sonic and Knuckles. That's their name. Jahmyr Gibbs is Sonic, and David Montgomery is Knuckles. But David Montgomery is a physical, downhill running style that breaks a lot of tackles, and a guy that has won this Lions team a lot of games. He has. He's put them in positions to capitalize and win games often, just because he slashes and you can't arm tackle the guy. He's he packs a punch when he runs the football. He's running through tackles. He's breaking tackles. People that try to arm tackle can't get him down. He's a horse, man. Like, just an absolute horse, trampling people and moving the chains, breaking off big chunks of yardage. So stop and think about, I always think about the Saints when they had Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara. I almost think these Lions running backs might actually be better. And that's, Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara, that was a tough 1-2 punch. These Lions running backs, they might be better, man. Like, I'm telling you, you got David Montgomery starts a lot of games, and he just starts chipping away at the defense. And they're getting tired because they're having to deal with this bruiser of a running back in David Montgomery. And then when they're tired, Jahmyr Gibbs comes in the game, and this fatigue defense that isn't running as fast and isn't hitting as hard has to try to keep up with Jahmyr Gibbs. It's such a great strategy by the Lions offense where you're like, this Lions rushing attack is such a key part of them being the highest scoring offense in the NFL. Because they're so balanced and they have this 1-2 punch that's really good. They're really, able to take over games and dominate just by handing the ball off, which is such a blessing in the NFL to be able to win games by handing the ball off. Because remember, in the NFL, the line of scrimmage is just chaos. The line of scrimmage can be eaten up quickly by defenses, which is why it's become such a passing league in the first place, because a lot of times there's nothing to work with on the ground. But the Lions have this really good offensive line that is opening holes for these two good running backs. They're taking advantage of these opportunities. And, the running back position is also brutal. So when one guy gets banged up, you also have another running back in there that can get the job done. It's so important for this Lions team to have those two guys. I just can't put enough emphasis on what they bring to the table for this Lions team. I think Gibbs is just going to keep getting better because he's just such a young guy and his best days are still ahead of him. Montgomery might be a little bit older, but I still think he's got a lot left in the tank. When you see him play, there's nothing that is indicating to me that the guy is slowing down anytime soon. So this tandem could be around, man, if they're able to keep it intact. And I know the running back position can get old fast in the National Football League, where like guys that are really good just fall off a cliff and they're not effective anymore. I mean, you look at Ezekiel Elliott, 1 minute he's the best running back in the NFL, and then out of nowhere, he just can't keep up anymore because there's so much tread that's off the tires. I don't see David Montgomery slowing down yet. I still see him, helping the Lions win games. Jahmyr Gibbs, we know he's still got a lot of football left in front of him. So, and think about the pressure it takes off Jared Goff. Jared Goff does a good job conducting that passing offense that they have there with, Jameson Williams and Amon-Ra St. Brown. But to be able to hand the ball off to these two guys and they're going for big chunks of yardage. How many times have they got this Lions team down by the goal line and then they switch to the other running back and punch it in? It's just incredibly effective. And teams aren't able to game plan for two dynamic, high-end running backs. You might be able to game plan for one guy, but it's hard to game plan for two guys, and their styles contrast so much. They're so much different. One's a power runner. One's an electric speed runner that it's such a change of pace to go against that it's hard to game plan for both of that. Teams up to this point haven't been able to do so. They haven't been able to do so because, yeah, you're dealing with the physicality of David Montgomery, and he's lowering his head, putting it in these linebackers' chest and causing these linebackers to fall on their back. And now they got to get up this next set or this next play, and Jahmyr Gibbs just takes it to the outside, hits that sideline, goes up the sideline, off to the races. And you're like, I was used to going up against this power back. Now I got to keep up with one of the fastest players in the NFL. We talk about what Tyreek Hill does to these defenses. Jahmyr Gibbs puts a lot of pressure on these defenses too, because it's like this guy has unusual speed to the point where it's like he's the fastest guy on the field almost every single game. And, when you're outgunned, you're outgunned. There's not much you can do when, if you're a battleship with one turret and the other battleship you go against has cannons all along the side, turrets everywhere. They have 20 guns and you have one gun. Guess what? You're outgunned. That's what I think about Jahmyr Gibbs. He's the battleship with 20 guns and you're the battleship with one gun. You're outgunned. There's not much you can do because his speed is electric. It's electric. There's no other way to describe it. He's a big play waiting to happen. And as much as Lions fans want Jahmyr Gibbs to get more touches, it's like you're also protecting him by sharing the workload. And is there really a huge drop-off when David Montgomery comes on the field? Yeah, they might get it done in different ways, but the drop-off isn't that big at all because David Montgomery is still getting the job done very effectively. He's still getting it done in his own way, but man, is he a brutal player to go against, and all the tackles he breaks and how much life he pumps into this Lions team by breaking tackles left and right. And you want to talk about energizing a football team. David Montgomery is capable of energizing a football team just because he's the heart that pumps the blood through that team. When he gets going, he's chopping people up and breaking arm tackles, and he's just having fun out there because he knows they can't touch him. The other players on that team start having fun. You don't think that those linemen that are opening holes don't have fun watching David Montgomery getting loose on everybody? You better believe they're laughing and having fun watching them like nobody can tackle this guy. They love David Montgomery. Those offensive linemen love David Montgomery. You don't think Jahmyr Gibbs has fun when he's on the sidelines watching David Montgomery rumble against everybody? Jahmyr Gibbs loves it. Those guys have a good relationship. They're cool with playing their role each. They root for each other. It's an exciting tandem to watch. One of the better running back tandems in the National Football League. Explosive, powerful, dynamic. They rumble. I mean, you got to stack the box, and with that Lions passing attack, you can't stack the box. So you're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't. That's what happens when you play the Lions, and that's why they're the highest scoring offense in the National Football League, because you can't stack the box with that passing attack. You can't play deep, cover 2, cover 3 that often, because now this Lions rushing attack takes advantage of those safeties being way far back. So just a matchup nightmare when you go against this Lions team, and you can see why they've been successful over the course of these past 2 years, just because they have so many different ways to beat you. And a lot of that goes back to David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. They pack a punch for this Lions offense. That's all I got for this latest episode of the Football Game Tonight podcast. I'm your host, John Kuzma. Don't forget, if you want to be a member, you can click the link in the episode description box of this latest episode, and you can become a member of this show. If you're a pro football fan, this is the place to be. Just tune in and listen. You can check us out wherever podcasts are found. I'm John Kuzma. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm signing off.